Welcome to our time together. When you know the culture from which the Bible comes, it can help deepen your understanding of its message. We're able to discover meaning that the original readers of the Bible, when it was first written, would have recognized because it was references to their own culture. But they're not as clear to us 2,000 years later. I'd like to offer one example of this today, and it's the promise of Christ's return that we find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. While it might not look like it to us, this is a description of a wedding celebration. 1 Thessalonians 4 parallels both the Jewish and the Greek wedding customs of the time. But actually, it's not a parallel. It takes those customs and reshapes them to help us understand the hope that we have. Now, there are several other places in the New Testament that explicitly describe our relationship to Christ as being like the relationship of a bride to her groom. This is a little bit more subtle here, but if you know the culture, you'll be able to recognize it. Paul begins with an explanation of Christ's return with the assurance that those who have died will rise first. And then we get to verse 17. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. I'd like to focus on three phrases in this verse. We'll be caught up to meet the Lord in the clouds. So first, Paul tells us that we will be caught up. The Greek word he uses literally means that we will be seized, will be taken away suddenly and forcefully. Now, in Jewish weddings, there's a custom called the nisuin. It comes from the root of a word that means to carry. This is when the bride is carried or taken from her home to the groom's house. Now, back in the days of the first century, when the New Testament was written, the groom and his attendants would arrive unexpectedly, by surprise, to take away the bride. Greek weddings of that same time were similar, in which the bride was taken in a mock abduction. The groom would steal his bride away. He would grab her by her wrist to take her away. And this custom was influenced by the Greek myth of Hades, who was the god of death, when he took away Persephone to be his bride. In other words, it is a custom of the bride being snatched up by death. But for us, it is the exact opposite. Instead of Hades coming from below to take us into death, Christ descends from above to take us into life. Christ seizes us and carries us away from the power of death into life eternal. Second, Paul says that we are taken to meet the Lord. This is similar to the bridal processions that we find in both Jewish and Greek customs of those days. We get a sense of the Jewish tradition in the story that Jesus told in Matthew chapter 25 of 10 virgins who were at a wedding feast. 5 were wise enough to bring enough oil in their lamps, and 5 were foolish and unprepared. But these virgins were waiting for the bridegroom to come. In other words, they were waiting for him to bring his bride to his house. For Greek weddings, this procession was the most important part of the wedding ceremony. Now, because of the marriages being arranged back in those days, the groom was actually a stranger to the bride. She didn't know anything about who he was. So the groom would give her gifts to ease her fear, to persuade her to go with him to his house. Now, the good news for us is that Christ is no stranger to us, but nonetheless, he surrounds us with gifts and blessings as he takes us to his home. And third, Paul said that we would be caught up in the clouds. Now, this might seem to us like a reference to Christ's ascension into heaven. And it probably is that. But it is more than simply a reference to the ascension. In Jewish culture, A cloud represents the divine image. For example, in the Old Testament, Moses met God in a cloud at the top of the mountain to receive the Lord. And Ezekiel saw the Lord coming in an immense cloud with flashing lightning. Jewish weddings, even today, include what's called a chuppah. A chuppah is that canopy under which the wedding couple stands. But the root meaning of the word means to cover or to protect. The chuppah represents or symbolizes God's sheltering presence over the wedding couple. Isaiah chapter 4 tells us that the Lord will create a cloud of smoke by day and a glow of flaming fire by night. Over everything the glory will be a canopy. It will be a shelter and shade from the heat of the day, and a refuge and a hiding place from the storm and the rain. So, when Paul tells us that we are caught up in the clouds, this means that we are under God's care and his shelter. And we find something similar in the Greek wedding customs, in which the clouds were associated with divine consummation. So let's put this all together. And what does it mean? It means that Christ will come suddenly, unexpectedly, to snatch us away from the power of death. He will lead us into his presence. He will take us to his home, and he surrounds us with his blessing. And when we are there, we will rest under his protection and shelter. By describing Christ's return in this way, Paul moves us away from fear of what will happen when we die into expectation and hope and joy. Would you pray with me, please? Holy God, thank you for the many ways in which we can find meaning in your holy word. Thank you for these echoes of wedding ceremonies that we find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and the way in which they give us hope and joy as we await your coming. Amen. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again later.